All right, good afternoon, and in some cases, good morning, green industry. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rob McCoy. I will be going through building your fertilizer program with you. We're going to try and focus on not only the agronomic approach, but also the budget. As I mentioned, I'm Rob McCoy. One of the benefits of me getting to do this is that I speak with probably hundreds of lawn care and landscape companies each year, and this is a pretty extensive topic that we cover. And sometimes I'm doing it on my own for a company, sometimes I'm working with them, but we're going to go through kind of the thought process of what I like to use and what seems to be working well for them. Um, this is not a step-by-step tutorial, or this is a step-by-step tutorial, but there are some things to keep in mind. We don't know what the weather's going to do. We're assuming that the equipment is calibrated and working properly and the technicians are trained. The soil testing will give you some direction, but it's not going to give you all your answers. Also, it's not specific to your region, but you will be, regardless of what region you're in, you will be able to build a program based off of these steps. As I mentioned before, we don't know what equipment you're using and whether it's calibrated correctly, but you can make adjustments based on the equipment that you're using. And if you want to build a Holganix program using some of our products, we have reps that would be able to help you. In certain cases, that would be me. So just put a request into the chat box, and we'll be happy to get in contact with you and work through you specifically in your region, your equipment, and get you started off in the right direction for next year. We have a few poll questions. We're going to put the first one up right now just to gather some information so that we really know who we're talking to and can tailor this to your needs as much as possible. So the first question, are you currently using Holganix? I could see the answers coming in quickly. And Holganix could be granular, it can be liquid. It could be Bio 800 products. It could be just our fertilizers. Any Holganix product that could be considered. Give it a couple more seconds. All right, let's see what we have. So 20% are already using product, 40% are not, and 40% are interested in using products. They may be testing products at this point. So regardless of whether you're using Holganix products or not, this is going to be helpful. You know, there's plenty of years that I was in lawn care where Holganix didn't even exist. We were still using this step-by-step tutorial to decide on how we were going to build our program for the following year. So we're going to go through what questions to ask, the process in figuring out what direction to go, and then actually building the program. So some of the questions to ask before you get started: what's your soil telling you? What applications have provided the best or worst results in the past? What time of year do you receive the most cancel requests? When's the best time to get referrals? And when are what are your business growth plans? A lot of times people don't, those last three questions are not typical questions that get asked enough when building your fertilizer program. But let's get started on the soil testing. If you look at, there's a huge difference in soil tests that are available out there. Sometimes you get very generic NPK results. Sometimes you'll have some of the micronutrients included in that. There are really good soil tests that are available where you can even get the biological activity, the cation exchange capacity, things like that. And they have overall ratings for soil health. So don't just take for granted that all soil tests are the same. You can get really valuable information to understand not only what nutrients are needed or what micronutrients are needed, but also how active your soil currently is. So you want to, and there's different requirements in different states, but if you didn't have any requirements for your soil testing, you want to do 2 to 5% of the total properties that you have. Make sure you vary on locations and quality of the property, so the turf quality of those properties. And then you want to make adjustments in your early rounds to ensure that you're going to be able to get better results throughout the rest of the year. If you're low in potassium, for example, you want to make sure that you get that corrected early on in the season so that it's not something you're trying to correct as the season goes along and your results are suffering the entire way. What applications have provided the best or worst results in the past? So, there's a lot of times where a company will come to me and say, I'd like you to design a new program for us. Well, I don't want to change a program that works. I may have suggestions for adding something in or taking something out, but it's always best to start with what you know. So look at the program that you've done, not just this past year, but in years past, maybe 3 years worth of information, and look at, hey, we really got a good result from this product, or we got a good result putting an application down with this timing, or combining two applications really worked well. There was no sacrifice in agronomic value. We were just able to be more profitable doing it that way. And remember, when you're building a program, it's a fluid process. You're not going to, as much as you think you're going to finish it, you can finish a plan, but it's probably going to change throughout the season. So be prepared for what you're going to look at as the season progresses. For example, the color and vigor of the turf that you're taking care of. If that is performing really well, you might be able to scale back on the amount of nitrogen that you're using and be able to save some money. If we get a strange weather occurrence where you're in a drought or you're getting a tremendous amount of rain in the spring, you may need to adjust the amount of nutrients that you're putting down, or even the type of nutrients that you're putting down. Mike Tyson had a great quote, and building a program and working a program through a season is a lot like a boxing match. You have to play offense and defense at the same time. And I'm sure that every boxer has, went into every fight with a plan. But Mike Tyson's quote of "everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face" is very applicable to building a lawn care program. Everybody has a plan that's going to work when they go into their season, and then seasonality hits. We had, and it's different for every region in the United States. This year, we saw shortages on products. We saw different products escalating in price at different rates, which will affect what you're going to use. We saw armyworm problems over a good portion of the country. All of that will force you to make adjustments. But if you understand what some of your possible adjustments are going into the season, then it reduces the stress and makes it so that you can make those adjustments quicker and easier, and also talk to your suppliers and know what they have available, so that you can, not be stuck in a situation where you're searching for a product and you end up paying too much for it. You want to know, like, all right, after we do basically our first 2 rounds, we may have to make some adjustments. What are our options for round 3, round 4, in case those adjustments have to happen. So now we're getting into those 3 areas of questions where you typically don't have companies focusing. So cancels. pull a cancel report by month, and see what the reasons were. I would always check my reports by routes, because your technicians can affect that, your equipment can affect that, and you could also have different type of soil or age of homes in certain routes versus other routes. But you want to identify if you had cancel reasons that pertain to the agronomic results that you were getting. That's going to be a first sign of making an adjustment. If something isn't working, you got to make sure that you're accounting for that in the following season. If you have really bad results in the summer and people were complaining, you want to look at any call logs that you may have to identify that as well, so that you can avoid the cancels. So if you identify a high cancel request time period, make sure you're looking ahead of that. Not what you're doing when you're getting the cancels, but what did you do the previous application? Did you have challenging weather? Did you use a product that possibly wouldn't work well with that weather? And that's where your answers are going to come for some of the adjustments that you want to make right off the bat. So we have some more poll questions. Let's put another poll question up there and gather some more information so that we can tailor this a little bit more. So do you use liquid or granular fertilizer? There's good options with both. There's benefits to both, and there's some drawbacks to using both. When I was running a lawn care company and owned a lawn care company, we used granular fertilizers and liquid weed controls. And so, we saw the benefit of doing that, and then we switched to start using liquid for both. And as long as you switch your equipment, switch your processes, and you're not trying to put a square peg into a round hole, then you can really maximize your results. Well, let's see what we got on the results. 100% granular. All right, good to know. That's the most definitive answer that I've seen in a poll question, where it was 100% in one way. All right, so next area of business: referrals and business growth. If it's a good time to grow your business, then take advantage of it. So specifically, one of the points that I bring up with landscape installation companies, you get the majority of your referrals within 2 weeks of completing a landscape. So what does your landscape look like 2 weeks after your install's done? Are the plants thriving, or do they look like they're going through some stress because of transplant stress? So you, in that case, you want to invest in products that are going to make sure that you can maximize your growth potential. And at the same time, if you are investing into marketing, like in your spring season, or if you're doing a early fall push for new customers, you have to make sure that your results look good, because that's the first place that people are going to look, is what results are you already getting? Does their current lawn and the lawn care company that's servicing, are they doing a better job than what you're doing for their neighbor? Because the reason that that's important, sure, you could go get new customers just based off of, direct mail pieces or social media or something like that. But the best customers for you to get are the neighbors of current customers. So you want to make sure that the results are there so that you can maximize your profitability by getting those neighbors. So make sure that you're coordinating. If you're going to have marketing efforts and sales efforts at different times of the year, it's a good time to invest in good products to make sure that you are really producing a top-notch result. And frankly, if you produce a bad product, then you could be throwing money down the drain, and it's not on your cancels necessarily. It could just be like on your conversion rates for your sales and marketing. So the process, we're going to look at nutrients. We're going to look at weed controls, the missing soil components, seasonal pressures, application methods, and the budget. But before we do that, let's do another poll question. All right, the next poll question is, what type of fertilizer do you use? Organic fertilizer, chemical or synthetic fertilizer, or both? And this is a no judgment zone. I was one of those guys that when I built a program 20 years ago, I was convinced that organic fertilizers were a waste of money and that we were only going to use synthetic fertilizers because of how predictable the result was. Times have changed because what we've seen is that you need to have a balance because those synthetics aren't working the same way that they used to. All right, let's see what the results are. 20% synthetic fertilizer and 80% on both. It is hard to be 100% organic. And I actually, most of the time when someone suggests that, hey, I'd like to work with you on building a program and I want it to be 100% organic, the first words out of my mouth are, no, you don't want a 100% organic program. It's just very difficult to get the results that a customer is going to stay with you for with just organic fertilizers. So let's look through this process a little bit more. So when we focus on the nutrients, what's your total target for nutrient levels? You know, it used to be pretty standard that like you get 4 pounds of nitrogen or you know, it depends if you're further south, 5 pounds of nitrogen. You know, the soils are reacting differently. So you want to, you know, that's another reason to get those soil tests so that you have kind of an example of what's needed, not just through the process, but what's your baseline, what's your starting point? Do you need to increase your potassium levels or your phosphorus levels in order to get a predictable result that you can build your business off of? Liquid fertilizers give you more flexibility, and they're typically less expensive. So that's a really big topic right now because fertilizer costs are going through the roof. You know, particularly because of nitrogen and phosphorus raw material costs. From what I've seen on the granular side, those numbers are shooting up faster than the liquid side. And you frankly have more flexibility in how you can adjust your rates literally from day to day based off of the mix that you're going to run. So if you have the ability to save some money on the fly because your results are top notch because the weather is cooperating perfectly, then you may want to look at running a liquid fertilizer program just because of that ability to change. You know, if you're not going to use a like a ride-on sprayer spreader and you're going to use a pull hose, that equipment is not tremendously expensive in comparison to some of the other expenses that you could face with your equipment. And it's important to look at your nutrient source. A lot of times when I get a question about someone who's pairing Bio 800 with a fertilizer, they will give me the fertilizer analysis and say, you know, what rate should I put this down at if I'm pairing it with a Bio 800? Oftentimes, I will request that they send me the actual label so that I can help them with that. Just recently, I had a customer that was asking for pricing on our 3000. And the problem was that they were comparing it against another product, which was not what they expected it to be. They were comparing a 3000 versus another 3000, but the one that they were comparing it to was it was mainly urea and it was just suppressed versus our product, which was a methylated urea. Methylated urea is going to be a much higher quality nitrogen, and it's going to have different slow release characteristics versus the other one, which will be slow release based off of an added ingredient. So if when you're looking at that, you're really looking at availability to the plant. What's the conversion rate of the amount of nitrogen that you would be, in that case, the amount of nitrogen that you're putting down versus what percentage of that is actually going to get used by the plant. So there's different nitrogen sources that have to be converted more than once in the soil by all those soil microbes working along there. And you don't want to lose any percentage that you don't have to. So sometimes you look at, that example of methylated urea. That methylated urea is more available to the plant than a standard urea that has to be converted. So you want to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck, and that's one of the ways that you can do it. Sometimes spending a little bit more up front is going to make it so that you have a better result using less product. Weed controls. A lot of times we jump into weed controls and we use the standard weed controls that we always use. We're going to need a three-way herbicide. You probably are going to need a three-way herbicide, but there are different types of three-way herbicide out there. So you want to focus on really what you're controlling, what pressure are you getting from different weeds, and you may want to switch from one year to the next because the mode of action on that weed control could be different, and you don't want the weeds that are in those properties to build up any resistance to the current mode of action that you've been using. So I always suggest to make slight changes in the weed control from one year to the next, just because I don't want to have that resistance build up. Another thing to consider is, the timing of the applications. I like to think of it as you're building more than one program at a time. You're building a nutrient program that you need to have overlap and have a nice balance of nutrients working throughout the season to keep the color and the growth the way that you want throughout the season. You have a secondary program that is for your weed control. They don't have to work exactly at the same time. Even though you have applications that are getting done and visits that are getting done, it doesn't mean that the best course of action is to do all of a certain type of weed control within a certain application. So for example, round two, your round two application, you may have a pre-emergent for crabgrass in there, and you may have a broadleaf weed control in there. But all of your broadleaf weeds, based off of when you do that, the different sections of the route, may not be popping up at the same time. You may not be able to kill the majority of them, or the majority of the ones that you kill at the beginning of the round versus the end of the round. So you really want to look at it as timing it with the weather. When's the best time to get the result that you're looking for? And you may need 6 weeks, you may need 10 weeks of weed control applications at a certain time of year to control everything that you need to control. Well, don't time it with the applications, time it with the need. That's important to understand. And yes, you can say that, for communicating to a customer, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing a fertilizer and a weed control, but they're really paying for a result. So you want to make sure that you're doing that in not only the most effective way possible, but the most cost efficient way possible as well. And service calls are expensive. Back in the day when we were measuring this, we just slapped a cost on there that it cost us $50 every time we went out to do a service call. It's probably more expensive than that now. Not just because of the time it takes to do it, but the time to get out there. Their activity, and you don't want service calls to constantly be scheduled, and you definitely don't want to pay a separate person to just go out there and only do service calls. So the timing of your weed control applications and what you're using will drastically affect that. Um, People ask me all the time about doing spot treatments. I think spot treatments can be valuable at certain times of the year, but it's also very challenging to have very effective spot treatments on weed control because you can't see all the weeds. If you're relying on your own vision as you're going over a lawn to spot where all the weeds are, you're going to spot mature weeds, but you're not going to spot what's going to come up in 10 to 14 days. That's still going to be below turf level, and that's going to show up pretty quick once you're gone. And then again, you have another service call. So when you know that you have a lot of pressure from weeds in a season, I would recommend that you do a full coverage application. And the last point, liquid weed controls always work better. Everybody on this webinar is probably in agreement on that. That's not new information, but I can tell you that we've made the mistake of trying to save a little bit of money and do a granular weed and feed, and the feed worked great and the weeding did not. So stick with the liquid weed controls. The contact, the absorption, everything, translocation through the plant is all more effective. So some of the things in the soil components to look at, obviously a soil pH level is important. I didn't even mention that with the soil test that you're having done. I haven't seen a soil test done that does not incorporate a pH level, but you want to make sure that you are correcting that. Similar to any of the levels, the sooner you can correct it, the better, because it's going to make the rest of your results as you go along more predictable. Now, with the pH level, if you have to use something like lime to correct the pH, remember that it's also going to take months for that pH level to change in the soil. So the sooner you can do it, the better. You don't want to get into a more stressful time of the year and say, all right, well, we have to do something for the soil now because the results are starting to drop off. You're not going to be able to fix that problem at that point in time. So say that June comes along and we're already in a drought situation and the temperatures are high and you're trying to do anything that you can to fix the results that you're getting. You may be too late on something like a pH level because by the time you're through that portion of the season where the temperatures could potentially start cooling off or you could start getting rain, that's when your pH level is going to be really corrected at that point. And another thing to look at is the cation exchange capacity, CEC. It's the ability of the soil to hold and store cations. It's also, it says it in the name, it's an exchange capacity. You want those nutrients to be able to pass through the soil effectively and efficiently. So if you can get a soil test that has that on there, that's going to be very telling about not only the ability of the soil to make nutrients available, but just the overall health of the soil. It's a measurement that we've had for some time. It's not a new measurement, but it's often what I found is that golf course superintendents pay attention to it. Lawn care companies usually don't. So it's something that we could benefit in the lawn care world. It really gives you a good feel for, if I put something down, am I really going to get the benefit that I want out of it? Another thing to consider when you're building a program is seasonal pressures. So obviously disease, weeds, drought. One of the things that's not on here that was a big pressure this year was insect damage. I had mentioned the army worms. That was a derailing factor for some companies that really got hit with it bad and just couldn't get their hands on products fast enough and had to switch their program and add in another expense. But if you if you equate this lawn care to just like human health, having one of these pressures is like breaking a bone. That you should work out and eat right and do all those things, and that's what we're trying to do with building a program. But if you are working out and eating right, and you break a bone, 100% of your attention goes to, um, getting that bone healed. Well, it's the same thing with seasonal pressures. A lot of times, 100% of your attention goes to the seasonal pressures. Putting down fungicides to get control over the disease, because it doesn't matter what you do with the program if you can't get these pressures under control. So there are preventative measures that you can take. When we were just talking about weed controls, that's one of the reasons that I like putting down a blanket weed control application, is because if I can get the majority of weeds controlled in the spring season, then I'm just not going to have the sporadic pressure later on in the season and have to fight against that while I'm trying to do everything else. And if you run into a drought situation, and certain areas of the country are more susceptible to drought than others, you want to have another plan in place right off the bat. So know what times of the year you've had droughts in the past, and then have alternative applications that you would be doing if you're going to go into a drought situation versus being in an ideal weather situation. Application methods: what equipment do you use? You can see a Z spray on the picture right there. We used Z sprays in the past. We used permagreens, we used pull hoses, we used push spreaders. We used a lot of different things. All of them had different benefits, but you want to make sure that based on the equipment that you're using products that complement that equipment. So we already talked, we got kind of a feel for, liquid versus granular versus both. Let's put up another poll question to see where we are on equipment. So what type of equipment do you use? Pull hose, backpack sprayer, push spreader, ride-on, or all of these? As I mentioned, we used all of them in the past. We had different routes that were tailored to different equipment, based on property sizes, based on hills, based on traffic. Did we want to have a truck and trailer, going into, the borough of a town where parking was limited? We always found that it was, for the smaller properties, the pull hose was just the easiest, most efficient way to go. All right, so let's see what we have in the poll. 40% backpack sprayer, 60% push spreader, 40% ride-on, and 20% all the above. Okay, that's good information to understand. The push spreaders, you're going to have that ability to use the granular, and you're going to be able to get products that combine a lot of features, such as, the synthetic component. It'll have, you can have some organic matter in there. With our products, you're able to incorporate biology into the granular application. I like the ride-on approach, just because you can do your granular application and your liquid application at the same time, and time is money. The reason why we pay such close attention to what order we're doing these properties in is because of the time. Well, if you can cut down on doing 2 applications to 1 application in a single visit, that's obviously going to multiply your profits as you do more and more applications. Another thing that we look at is spray volume. Spray volume can affect the results that you get more dramatically than you think. The carrier volume, we used permagreens before we used LT Rich Z sprays, and the LT Rich had a better carrier volume for weed control than the permagreen did, and we saw an immediate difference in the weed control effectiveness. Same thing with using a pull hose. You use a higher spray volume, it's going to do 2 things. One, you're going to get a better coverage rate for your weed controls, and on your liquid fertilizers, you have the ability to work into the soil faster. The difference between a half a gallon per 1,000 is a lot greater than you think when you're at those low numbers. The difference between 1 gallon per 1,000 of total volume going down versus a gallon and a half of total volume going down will produce an immediately different result in most cases. So it's something that you want to consider when you're choosing your products. Are you using a low volume spray, or are you using a standard weed control? When you're with the majority of the properties that you take care of, what's the size? Is it efficient to load and unload a piece of equipment, or would it make more sense to just pull a hose? And in some cases, if you're using a backpack sprayer, that's really low volume. Are you getting the control that you need, or should you just be using it for spot spraying or doing smaller jobs? And obviously, one of the things that we can't forget is the budget. So my recommendation is create your budget ahead of time, and don't compare until you are finished creating your budget and creating your agronomic program. So once you have the ideal for both, then you can see how it compares. But when you try and do both at the same time, a lot of times you will sacrifice your agronomic program for your budget. I would want to see the whole program before I start doing that on the fly. So that's, and a lot of times people will do the agronomic program first and then do a budget. I think you have to do a budget because it's more of I think you have to do the budget first because it's more of a blind comparison. But you could do it either way. I just wouldn't do them together because you'll make adjustments on the fly and not really notice the effects of one application to the next when you're doing that. Service calls are a part of your budget, so make sure that's figured in. If you look at your previous history, as we were talking about before, and for cancels and service calls and service call requests, if you are incorporating the cost of service calls and you have a set price for those, you may realize, like, hey, if we can reduce our service calls by incorporating this product, typically it's much less expensive to apply the correct products at the correct time and even spend more on your products than to do service calls. If you are trying to really cut costs, and I can understand that with the escalated fertilizer costs that we're dealing with now, but it may bite you in the butt when it comes to the service calls. Your cost of goods sold should be about 20% of the total of charge. I've seen success as high as 30%, but you have to take into account, are you dealing with a lot of new customers, because you may have to invest more into the products that you're using there, because you don't have the benefit of the momentum that you've built with your current customer base. So 20% is a good mark to shoot for, but it can be higher if you are trying to have rapid growth, or if you just are acquiring a lot of new customers. It's a number that you want to be aware of. It doesn't mean that there's only one right number. And it's always better to scale back your ideal program than to try and balance the budget while you're doing that at the same time. You want to know what your ideal program looks like agronomically, so that you know what you're giving up. If you do it simultaneously, you may not realize how much you're giving up because you're almost conditioning yourself to do it along the way. So again, I would stress the fact that identify your ideal agronomic program before you tie your budget into it. So in summary, our first part, look at the soil, look at your past history on cancels and what you plan to do on sales. Then look at the nutrients, weed controls, missing soil components, seasonal pressures, application methods, and know what your budget is. And then you want to build in a certain oil. What soil needs do you have? that you have to fix in order to get predictable results as you move along. And then what nutrients do you want to use in order to get those results? Remember, it's not as simple as just saying, I need this much nitrogen. There's different types, there's potassium. And that's just talking about needs that you have to add in there, and then balance and adjust for your budget. It seems easy, but there's a lot of homework to be done when you do it in this method. But I assure you that you're going to reduce the stress that you have next year by considering all these things. You're going to have a more predictable program to work these in place. And hopefully you don't have to go to your plan C's. The more options that you have for yourself based off of certain times of the year where you're going to analyze the results that you're getting, the less stress you're going to have. So we're happy to help you build a program. You can contact any of your Holganix representatives. You can contact me. My contact info is on there, and we can work with you to go through this process and reduce stress for next year. We're in an unfortunate situation where our customers are not going to understand that we're really trying to do the best that we possibly can for them, and our hands are tied with some of the pricing that we're getting, specifically on fertilizers, not to mention the cost of shipping and things like that have all gone up. So we really have to sharpen our pencils, and we're here to help, regardless of how much of our products you use. We want to help you, because if you're successful, then we're successful.